it's just really important to be mindful of those things. That student sense of belonging, if they aren't physically in Ithaca, is depleted. And so how can we help during that? And then also just in general, like I would really encourage faculty and staff to attend events so that you're not just your role at Cornell, but as an opportunity to humanize you a little more. I think that would be a really cool way to just connect with students.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week, on Speaking of Language,
Nancy Martinsen of Cornell's Asian and Asian American Center describes the joys and challenges of being an international student in the United States and what we can do to support these students.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. Nancy Martinsen is joining us for today's episode. She is Associate Dean of Students and Director of the Asian and Asian American Center here at Cornell and does a lot to mentor and support international students.
Welcome to Speaking of Language, Nancy.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
We're delighted to hear from you about the best ways to mentor and support international students. What was the impetus for your work in this area, and what has your journey been with languages?
Yeah, so the A3C is a space that welcomes both domestic and international students, and our A3C interns are a mixture of both students. And also I co-advise the International Student Union, ISU, which is a wonderful way to keep a pulse on how international students are doing.
Yes.
And then actually due to COVID, it really had just a negative impact on international students. And so I was really happy to be tapped to better work with international students just to kind of help increase their sense of belonging. And so I serve on an implementation team whose focus is on the sense of belonging of international students. And so that's really exciting to be able to do that. In regard to my journey with languages, so I only speak English. I'm half Filipino and half white. And when my mom immigrated here, she experienced a lot of discrimination. And so she opted to raise her children to be as American as possible, so that we would better fit into America as opposed to what she was experiencing. And so being Filipino and not speaking Tagalog really makes you feel incomplete. And so I believe language is really nourishing, and it's really not only a way to express yourself, but to connect with your culture. And so I'm pleased to say that I have enrolled in Tagalog 1100 this semester.
Hooray!
Yeah. And this class is giving me life and just lifting my spirits during a very challenging and hurtful time for the Asian community. And so I'm really excited to be a part of that class. And I did enroll in Spanish when I was in high school because it has some similarities to Tagalog. And I surprisingly actually remember a fair amount of Spanish. And so that feels pretty good to be able to drop some tidbits here or there.
That's awesome. I was about to say, we know the place on campus if you have any questions about learning languages. So, Nancy, what are some of the challenges that international students face on university campuses more generally and maybe also more specifically during COVID?
Yeah. So truthfully, I really got tapped in, and not even intentionally, that's how the timing aligned for me to work with international students as COVID hit. And so that's really like the bulk of my experience. And so, in March, when Cornell transitioned into a virtual semester, there is this assumption that all students were sent home. And unfortunately, that's not accurate. There were some international borders that had already shut down. And there was a concern for students that if they did leave, would they be able to come back? And so we had a set of students who physically were isolated from their loved ones for well over a year. On top of that, the Trump administration had introduced a handful of policies which impacted international students' ability to study in the U.S. and really kind of presented in a way that made it feel like international students weren't welcome. When I worked in So I work in the diversity and inclusion portfolio, and the Access Fund is under that. And
Mm.
when COVID hit, we were given like hundreds of thousands of dollars to help students go home. And so for like 3 weeks, we became
Wow.
travel agents, and it was
Oh,
just a wild time. Like we
yeah.
literally had this whiteboard and was like, these borders are closed, or this border is going to close in 78 hours. Like the student needs to leave now. And even then it was terrifying to like, will
Yeah.
they make it in time? I specifically was working with a student who was trying to go to Kenya, and but she had 48 hours to get there. And I was
Oof.
like, I
Yep.
don't feel good about this. If you
Yep.
don't make it, if one flight is
Mhm.
delayed, like we can't help you anymore. Like you're going to be stuck at whatever country you're in. And she was like, I don't want to be here. Like, it's worth the risk to me. Like, please book this flight. And it was awful. And then, at the time, the mayor had decided to stop buses entering from New York City to here. And that's where most international students fly, is out
Of
of New
course.
York City. And so even having to think through like, oh my gosh, how are we going to get these students there? Like, it was truly hectic. And we were just planning it, right? So these students were living it.
Mhm.
And it was just such a scary time for them. And I think like it was also scary for domestic students, but like you don't even realize the privilege of like ultimately you could drive home. Like if the
Yeah.
flights didn't work out for you,
Sure.
you could still do that. There were still trains that were traveling. But for international students, the sense of urgency was so livid. It really was just kind of a pretty scary time.
Mhm.
Um,
Did that student make it back to Kenya?
She did make it back to
Nice.
Kenya, but oh my gosh, it was so it was so frightening. It was like one thing after the other though to get her there.
What support services do institutions of higher education generally offer? And more specifically, what services are available at Cornell and within the Asian and Asian American Center?
Yeah, so I think every college has some kind of version of like a Office of Global Learning type. Um, but I think it definitely ranges like who's in there and how it's being felt.
Mhm.
Something that I truly love the staff at the Office of Global Learning. I think they're just such phenomenal people. But I remember once in a space, it was in a breakout room, so it wasn't even like a huge meeting. But I was in a breakout room with Hirsch, and he was saying how customer service is really important to him. So it's not just about like, oh, I went here and I turned in this form. It's how did I feel when like I felt confident that when I turned this form in, like it was going to get taken care of. I felt welcomed when I was in this space. I felt comfortable, and just how he described just customer service and how important it is. Especially for international students, I just thought that was so amazing that like a person in leadership is really thinking through this and really cares about it and wants everyone else on his team to equally care about it. So I thought that was really cool. As I mentioned, I'm on an implementation team whose directive is to increase the sense of belonging for international students. We were recently awarded a paid grant, which like focuses on sense of belonging.
Oh, great.
And from that, we're going to do a project centering story circles.
Hmm.
Story circles is something that's kind of new to me, but a story circle is a group of people who share stories in response to a particular topic in a structured way that encourages full and authentic participation in both listening to and telling personal stories. And so I'm really excited about this project because I think it's a very creative and impactful way to share international student stories. Like,
Mm.
I know there's been a ton of initiatives to implement diversity trainings. And the thing with diversity trainings is you can care about them, but if you don't care about them, you can absolutely just keep forwarding along. Like you don't
Mm.
actually have to listen, right? And then
Mhm.
also in diversity trainings, I feel like if you really care about this topic, then you are going to take the time to read and pay attention. But if you don't, and if you think it's a waste of time, which some people unfortunately do, you are just going to forward along. And
Mhm.
so I'm excited about these story circles because I really do feel like it's an opportunity, a really creative way to listen and really listen to students' experiences. And so I'm hopeful about this project. I'm feeling good about it. And so we'll be working on that for like the next like 2 years or so.
Awesome.
So I'm pretty excited about that. And then just regarding to the A3C, we offer an array of programming. And so something that like due to COVID, we were trying to be mindful of like what community has been lost due to COVID and not being able to be physically in community. And so one of those things was like dance groups. And so we reached out to, I don't know if they're like, oh, they're like famous. They're like YouTube famous. not like, not like Paula Abdul or anything, but like, we had, we reached out to a couple like well-known artists and like invited them to host dance workshops. And those were also like international and domestic, like well-known dancers. And so that was really cool for students in those dance clubs, as well as just students who like to dance and aren't able to in the comfort of their home do that. And those were pretty successful. So that was really cool. And then we just launched this semester something called an Inspiration Speaker Series, where we invited an array of diverse speakers with intersecting identities and careers. It really tracked like a huge range of students. This series was rounded out by Eric Nam, who is a Korean American pop superstar and actually has a really huge following, both domestic and internationally. And so it's a great way to end the series.
That is wonderful. So I remember when I started as an international student a long, long time ago at Michigan State University, and there was a lot of excitement, but also some apprehension. And I think for me, coming from Germany to the U.S. already, I had already spent a year in the U.S. during high school. The transition wasn't really that difficult or that complicated or complex. But there were still some nuances that were scary and different and, trying to find new friends and your way around town. So what advice do you give to new international students? Yeah. What is among the best things that they can do as they settle into a new environment?
Yeah. So at Cornell, the main thing I would recommend is to take advantage of Prepare, which is a pre-orientation program hosted by the Office of Global Learning. And it truly is a fantastic way for students to make friends and get any questions answered. And I know that when I speak to ISU students about it, like they super push that program because it's before orientation. So even before you attend orientation, you know people already, like you see familiar faces. And ISU students had shared that the friends that they made at Prepare are truly their best friends in all their whole 4 years here, that they become roommates and they just really become inseparable. And it's just such a sweet story to know, like right from the start, that they're just excited to meet each other and support and they're exploring. Everything's new to them. And so it's just it's just nice to know that you are experiencing Cornell and Ithaca with a couple buddies who are equally as confused or lost as you are. There's just a strength in numbers there that I think is really cool. And then I'd also encourage them to just take advantage of the huge array of diverse programming offered at Cornell. And so the A3C, we recently helped facilitate an event where HILC, the Holland International Living Center, and ISU had put together an event to talk about dating norms. And it was such a fantastic event. Just truthfully, I think there was just so much nationwide that was happening that was so heavy that this was actually just a lighthearted, really fun thing that we did. And students, domestic and international students, got to talk about dating norms. And it was kind of comical because it was just like, wow, like that's the difference. Like what? And so like some of the things international students had shared is like, wait, what's a date? Like someone had shared that someone asked them to go to lunch with them and they're like, well, it's lunchtime. It's logical that this is the time to eat lunch. Like, sure, I'll go with you. And then later was confused because, the man who had asked her had thought this was a date. And she's like, why would you think this is a date? You just asked me to go to lunch, like just very confused. And so hearing like those little stories. And then also just like there's just language that we know as Americans that international students don't know. And so just kind of like Netflix and chill. So Netflix and chill is a phrase that Americans know. That means you're trying to hook up. But if you do not know that, that literally sounds like, oh, let me pick a movie. I'll buy some popcorn. This sounds fabulous. And so, yeah, so it's just funny, like just to hear like, wait, no, this is what this means, right? So yeah, so it truly was just such a fun event. And yeah, it was a good group of people who were eager to share experiences and stories. And then, yeah, just also talking about, well, how long should you date? What should marriage look like? What is a healthy relationship? And to really hear the differences. And it was, yeah, a nice group of international students. So like from all over, to hear them talk about it versus domestic students talk about it. It's just, yeah, it was such a cool event. But yeah, I would encourage folks just to take advantage of, yeah, those spaces that are specifically mixed to bring international and domestic students together. Because, yeah, it was such a joy. I enjoyed it. But it was so successful that we definitely want to do it again, just because it was so many teachable moments. Yeah, it was nice.
Very cool. Well, what can educators do to offer mindful inclusion of international students in their courses and their classrooms?
So the Office of Global Learning has a phenomenal website, and they actually host a page that offers tips for online instruction regarding teaching international students. And so I would absolutely encourage everyone to go and check out that page. But I think also like it's important to think through, not all of our international students came back to Ithaca. And so just really being mindful that, there's students who are still in their home countries and the time zones matter. And so, being mindful of that. I had a student who was living in Vietnam, and her family did not want her to come in fall. They just didn't trust. Granted, the U.S.'s COVID numbers were horrific during that time. So understandably, it was safer for her to stay in Vietnam. And so her parents didn't want her to come. And she was saying that she didn't feel like a student. Like I got connected to her because her advisor was like, I'm worried about this student. She doesn't feel like a Cornellian. Like she just feels really detached. And so they connected me with her, and I spoke with her, and she was saying like, I'm just watching TV, like on class. Like those are my classes, is me watching TV. Like I'm not engaged at all. And so she would literally take a nap at 10 o'clock so that she could be actively involved in a class at like 2 a.m. And she would do that 2 days a week just because she wanted some sense of being in a classroom and just speaking with students. Because how are you going to make friends if all of your interactions is just you watching them hours later on your screen, right? And so I think it's just really important to be mindful of those things, like that student sense of belonging, if they aren't physically in Ithaca, is depleted. And so how can we help during that? And then also just in general, like I would really encourage faculty and staff to attend events so that you're not just your role at Cornell, but as an opportunity to humanize you a little more. I think that would be a really cool way to just connect with students.
That's great.
Where can our listeners find out more information about A3C?
That's a great question. You can definitely catch us on our website. That's on the Cornell website. But also, I think the more fun way to follow us is through our Instagram. We also have Facebook, but I think Instagram is the most popular way to follow us. Our handle is Cornell A3C. And then as the advisor for ISU, I'd also encourage you to follow them on Instagram, and their handle is isu.cornell.
Wonderful. Well, Nancy, before we sign off, we'd like to ask you to share your favorite word in the language you speak, you love, you are learning. What is that favorite word of yours?
Yeah. So my favorite word is matapang, which means brave in Tagalog. And I had actually called my mom. So there was 2 elders who were beaten in Northern California. And so I was concerned. So I called my mom and I was like, hey, Mom, in true Asian fashion, we don't actually express concern. So it was just more like, hey, Mom, how was your day? What'd you do today? Who are you with? But it was my way of inquiring, like, are you with people? Are you making good choices? And she was like, just talking about her day. And it seemed, she's good, just living her day to day. And then she had asked me how I was doing. And truthfully, it was a really hectic time because May is already Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and most campuses celebrate that in April. So it already was going to be an uptick for me in regard to my calendar. But with the shootings and the increase of violence toward Asians, my schedule is just nonstop, and I had to quickly respond and create spaces. And so I was telling my mom, I'm like, oh man, we had these processing spaces. Like it's pretty heavy. Like I'm having a hard time. And my mom, she was all like, "Be matapang, my girl. Like, you're going to be okay." I know, right? I'm like tearing up just repeating the story.
Gives me chills. Yeah.
Right? But yeah, I just thought it was so sweet. Like in a time when I was trying to call her to make sure she was okay, like just how selfless she is, and just wanted to make sure I was okay.
That's beautiful.
We really appreciate you sharing that with us, and thanks so much for speaking of language with us today, Nancy.
Yes. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I appreciated it.
Next week, Bill Van Patten will be back on our podcast.
He gave a talk as part of our monthly LRC speaker series titled Barriers to Innovation in Language Teaching. Tune in to hear all about it. Until then,
Auf Wiederhören.
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu or look for Cornell LRC on Facebook and Twitter.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelica Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.